Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sharon Squassoni. I direct the Proliferation Prevention Program here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I'm so pleased you could join us. I know it's a very busy week for nuclear issues, both in Washington, here at CSIS, and also up in New York. But we have a great program for you today, and we have kind of an ambitious agenda, sort of everything's on the plate in terms of nuclear issues. I'm going to start with a few administrative remarks and then speak a little bit about a recent workshop report I had that I want to bring your attention to, and then I will introduce our speakers. And we are joined, as you can see on the screen, Paul Meyer is joining us from Vancouver. So actually, this is the first event I've ever had someone Skype in. So fingers crossed it works, but it looks great so far. So just administratively, we are on the record. We are live streaming. You're welcome to tweet. Do we have a Twitter hashtag? What would that be? PPP, at PPP. And just for everyone's comfort, please turn your cell phone ringers off, okay? It interferes with stuff. We have, in the event of an emergency, Yukari Sakaguchi in the back, she's raising her hand. She'll be your director. She'll tell you where to go. It's not too hard. We're on the first floor here, so probably just walk outside the building. Anyway, the impetus for this event was, it's actually decades in the making, because my first job in the U.S. government when I was hired to the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency was to help negotiate a fissile material production cutoff treaty. I'm going to call that a fissban for short today. Those of you who have any knowledge of this area know that that has gone nowhere, not just because of my work, but for a lot of different reasons. But so in looking ahead, that particular treaty has been stalled for a lot of different reasons. But in my work for the MacArthur Foundation, I was interested in, it's been a long time. It's been 25 years since there was any movement in the Conference on Disarmament. Is there a new paradigm? Is there something different we can try? And so we held a workshop here in June, and we have copies of the report outside. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this report, but I certainly welcome your comments. Actually, Paul participated in that workshop. I decided to broaden the agenda for today because there are so many interesting things happening out there. But the point of it was, we have the machinery of nuclear disarmament is basically rusted. The Conference on Disarmament, God bless it, negotiated a comprehensive test ban treaty, which was a good thing in my view, but still has not entered into force 20 years after it was signed. There's been little to no progress. There's been a little progress on the margin in talking about cutoff, but none at the Conference on Disarmament. So are there other approaches? Are there other avenues? Transparency measures? Can we talk about limiting enrichment and reprocessing? In the context of nuclear security, has the Iran deal caused us to think a little bit differently about sovereignty issues and whether or not we can live with some restrictions, for example, on producing highly enriched uranium going forward? So this workshop that we held in June, we talked about the current status of negotiations, we talked about technical obstacles, political challenges with India and Pakistan, and we didn't make any big recommendations, but I would truly appreciate any feedback that you have for us. And Paul will talk a little bit more specifically about FMCT. Okay, so my job now is to introduce our speakers and then get out of the way because I'm sure it's going to be an interesting discussion. So first, we are going to hear from Paul Meyer, who was the former Canadian ambassador to the Conference on Disarmament, and I think that in that capacity was where we first met many, many years ago. Today, he is an adjunct professor of international studies and a Center for Dialogue Fellow in International Security at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. He's also a senior fellow at the Simons Foundation. He had, in addition to the CD posting, he had other various positions within the Canadian Foreign Service. Following Paul, and Paul, since you're not here physically in the room, we had a little powwow up in the VIP room where we decided we're going to switch the order of the speakers, but you're still first. Anyway, we switched the order of the speakers a little bit. Going second, we'll have Anita Freed, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the State Department's Arms Control, Verification, and Compliance Bureau. Before she was in that position, she was the Director for Arms Control and Nonproliferation at the National Security Council, and she was a key figure in the negotiation and ratification of the New START Treaty. She has had a long and illustrious career at the Department of State, and we're very happy to have you, Anita. Following Anita, we'll hear from Daryl Kimball, who is the Executive Director of the Arms Control Association, and he's been in that position since 2001. He is a prolific writer and a tireless advocate for arms control and disarmament, and a stalwart figure, I would say, in our non-proliferation community. He, before joining ACA, he was executive director of the Coalition to Reduce Nuclear Dangers. Following Daryl, we have John Wolfstall, who is Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Arms Control and Nonproliferation at the National Security Council. John has kind of dipped in and out of government, and we had the pleasure of working together. Was it only once or maybe twice? Many, many, many years ago, but it's terrific to have him. John, you might know when he worked for Vice President Biden, was specifically in charge of CTBT. And those are all of our speakers. So I'm going to pass the microphone, as it were, over to you, Paul. And we'll probably, 10 to 15 minutes per speaker, and then we'll do questions after. But if you need to leave earlier, just let us know, and then we'll entertain questions from the audience directly for you. So, Paul, you have the floor.
Okay. Well, thanks, Sharon, and of course, greetings to friends and former colleagues in Washington. And thanks for this opportunity to speak to a theme that is not always top of mind within the Beltway, and that is how the rest of the world views the nuclear challenges that confront us. The UN General Assembly has just opened its session in New York, and starting next month, the first Committee on Disarmament and International Security will begin its work. And for many states, this is the one point in the year that they can address these issues and have their say on what course of action would be best to undertake. The 50-plus resolutions that get adopted at a typical first committee session are, in effect, an expression of the declaratory policy of UN members on these subjects. And as one might expect, they run the spectrum from the banal to the innovative. I think this year we can expect some real fireworks at the first committee, reflective of a growing sense of frustration on the part of the vast majority of states as to the current condition of multilateral nuclear arms control and disarmament. That condition is one of a serious failure to make progress on an agreed agenda for nuclear affairs. As Sharon alluded to just now, the designated body for negotiating multilateral agreements in this domain, the 65-member Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, has been in a state of complete paralysis for 20 years. Its last achievement was the negotiation of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 1996. And we have to recall that that's a key treaty that 20 years later has still not entered into force due to the failure of 8 designated countries to take the necessary action to allow this to happen. And while the international monitoring system under that treaty has been able to be built up and has a very robust capacity, I think it's important to remember that this unfinished business does continue to have consequences. For instance, the on-site inspection provisions for that verification regime cannot become operational until the treaty has entered into force. The negotiation of a treaty banning the production of fissile material for nuclear weapons, the fissban, has not commenced, despite this being an agreed objective of the international community for decades. The multilateral negotiations to effect nuclear disarmament pursuant to Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty have not occurred. And now, 46 years after the entry into force, many have concluded that the treaty no longer represents a viable bargain or the right vehicle for achieving a world without nuclear weapons. A sentiment that is reinforced by the major modernization programs for nuclear forces underway in all the nuclear weapon possessing states, both within and outside the NPT. So it was in reaction, in a way, to this rather bleak situation that last year at the General Assembly, a resolution was adopted to establish an open-ended working group to consider how to advance multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations. Now, this working group held several sessions earlier this year in Geneva and adopted its report in mid-August, a report which will be taken up by the General Assembly. The principal recommendation of the report was that the General Assembly in 2017 should commence the negotiation of a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. The report of the working group was adopted on a divided vote. There were 68 in favor, 22 opposed, and 13 abstentions. There's a couple of key points about this undertaking which I want to flag because they are likely to affect materially the atmosphere in which nuclear issues as a whole are going to be considered next month in New York. First, despite this open-ended working group being a duly constituted body pursuant to a General Assembly resolution, no nuclear weapon possessing states participated in its deliberations. This boycott of the working group by the states was deeply resented by the non-nuclear weapon states that attended the proceedings. For those states that have dutifully participated in various nuclear-related bodies and conferences that were of interest to the nuclear weapon states, it was frankly insulting to experience this boycott when the focus was on a subject, nuclear disarmament, that was a priority concern for them. This is not how one builds solidarity in pursuing the international cooperation required to make progress on global nuclear challenges. Second, the split in the ranks of the non-nuclear weapon states that had participated in the working group over its recommendations does not augur well for reestablishing a common purpose on nuclear files. Essentially, it was the members of NATO, with 3 exceptions, that opposed the working group report. They were obliged to be the proxies for the absent nuclear weapon states in arguing that continuing with the so-called step-by-step approach was the only correct course of action. The progressive approach these states advocate would have more credibility if there was some real progress to point to. Instead, these states came across as apologists for their nuclear weapon possessing allies and espousers of the supposed security benefits of nuclear arms. This is a dangerous notion at its core, since if nuclear weapons bring security to states, then surely every sovereign state should be able to avail itself of these benefits. Finally, if one takes at face value the, quote, unequivocal commitment to the total elimination of nuclear weapons that the NPT states have pledged to achieve in their respective review conferences, there is a yawning gap between the agreed goal and any diplomatic process to achieve it. The majority view emerging from the open-ended working group is that it is necessary to commence a multilateral negotiation to develop a treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons. The Austrian foreign minister announced last week in his General Assembly address that his country will co-sponsor a resolution to this effect at October's first committee session. If this resolution gets majority support, and there are good prospects that it will, next year we'll witness something of a rupture in the broad consensus that hitherto had been anchored in the NPT. The advocates of the ban initiative, which include many civil society groups as well as sympathetic states, believe that its intent to stigmatize nuclear weapons is beneficial, regardless of whether nuclear weapon states participate in these negotiations or not. In their view, it's overdue to fill the legal gap of the NPT, a treaty that, as you know, failed to prohibit nuclear weapons in a manner consistent with the comprehensive prohibitions that have been applied to the other weapons of mass destruction by means of the Biological Weapons Convention and the Chemical Weapons Convention, respectively. In my view, this situation is far from a healthy one for the integrity of the global nuclear non-proliferation disarmament regime. New fissures have opened up between nuclear weapon states, the non-nuclear weapon states, as well as amongst the non-nuclear weapon states themselves, over the merits of pressing forward with a nuclear weapons ban. The inability to make significant progress on long-standing disarmament objectives has discredited the current multilateral machinery and fueled discontent amongst a major subset of NPT states parties. Coupled with the failure to bring the remaining 4 outlier states into the NPT fold, the global nuclear order is under serious stress, and the prognosis for the future is not bright. Simply reaffirming the status quo and ignoring the new pressures on behalf of nuclear disarmament are not going to succeed in repairing the frayed fabric of the nuclear regime. And the implications for the international security environment could be serious indeed down the road. I think I'll leave it at that, Sharon, for some initial comments.
Thank you, Paul. I think that's a terrific start to our conversation. I'm going to welcome Anita. You can speak there or at the podium, whichever you prefer.
Sure. I'll stay here.
Okay. Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to participate, and I look forward to good questions. Paul, very good remarks to kick this off. I'm going to have a little different perspective from one of the nuclear weapon states, the United States perspective. But I'm glad you kicked off with the UN First Committee, which is kind of it's not a very well-known topic among some, but it is certainly amongst this group. But before we get to all of those, I do want to do a perspective of where the administration, how far we have come. We take the perspective of the glass half full. not the glass half empty. But let me first go back to some of the things that I've done and kick it off with, just last month I was in Kazakhstan, and this was to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the closing of the nuclear test site at Semipalatinsk that was witness to nearly 500 nuclear tests that shook the earth and clouded the skies with radioactive dust. This is really an interesting occasion. President Nazarbayev had a very useful forum for discussion, and really a pleasure to participate. A year before that, last August, I was honored to meet, I was in Nagasaki for the first time, which is really an eye-opening experience. I was honored to meet Mr. Fukuhori, who as a teenager survived the bombing of his hometown in Nagasaki. Mr. Fukuhori gave me a tour of his photo exhibit, which depicted the aftermath of the August morning 71 years ago. And he shared his images of his own personal tragedy in hopes of sparing future generations of the same fate. I mean, these are some really real-world events, the kinds of events that we, the United States, look very seriously upon. So it is our deep understanding of the destructive force of nuclear weapons that led the United States in the years since to work together with the Soviet Union to reduce nuclear weapon inventories and to draw a nuclear arms race between our nations to a close. It also informs President Obama's vision, as articulated in Prague in 2009, to pursue a world without nuclear weapons and to extend forever the 7 decades-long record of their non-use. The president there also, and I know I cannot say this often enough, but the president also acknowledged in that same speech that the fulfillment of this agenda would not occur overnight and might not even happen in his lifetime, but that we would set the course and push ahead. And we have. As the first step, the 2010 U.S. Nuclear Posture Review, the NPR, outlined 5 key objectives to advance the president's vision: reducing the role of nuclear weapons in U.S. national security strategy, preventing nuclear proliferation and nuclear terrorism, maintaining strategic deterrence and stability at reduced nuclear force levels, strengthening regional deterrence and reassuring U.S. allies and partners, and finally, sustaining a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal. A few months later, the United States and Russia signed the New START Treaty, which both sides continue to implement and are on their way toward meeting the central limits by February 2018. Capping the strategic forces of the United States and Russia at their lowest level since President Eisenhower occupied the White House. But at that time, and I was lucky enough to be there at the signature of the New START Treaty, the president said, this is a good treaty, but it's not, we can go lower, we can do better. Several years later, in 2013, in Berlin, the United States declared its willingness to pursue further reductions in deployed strategic nuclear weapons up to 1/3 below the New START levels. And this offer remains on the table. We have worked to engage Russia on this, but to date we have not been able to. But even as we work to make further progress, it is worth noting that the United States has reduced its total stockpile of active and inactive nuclear warheads from the height of 31,255 nuclear weapons in 1967 to 4,571 as of 2015. And we've done this while seeking to maintain the strategic stability that provides a foundation for global security. The strategic course that we have taken, and the one we will continue to pursue, is based on the principles of consensus and, most important, verifiability. It also reflects the reality that we cannot separate disarmament from the global security environment or strategic stability considerations. Most importantly, there is demonstrable, continual proof that our strategy works. The latest proof, in fact, was the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 2310 just last Friday. This is the CTBT. This resolution reaffirms that national moratoria against nuclear explosive testing are an example of responsible international behavior and encourages countries to make the necessary preparations for the day when the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty enters into force. Only through U.S. ratification of the CTBT, a key step toward the treaty's entry into force, can we make permanent the benefits of the treaty. North Korea's latest nuclear test, in flagrant violation of its international obligations, demonstrated the strengths of one of those benefits, the treaty's robust verification architecture. The international monitoring system and the International Data Center, at the heart of the treaty's verification regime, performed admirably. Within minutes, more than 30 IMS, or International Monitoring stations, detected a seismic event consistent with the footprint of past North Korean nuclear tests. The rapid detection of this event and the previous 4 North Korean nuclear tests highlights the effectiveness of the CTBTO's verification regime and why the United States is engaged in an effort to educate the public and Congress on one of the national security benefits gained through the treaty's entry into force. In contrast to the U.S. approach to build upon decades of pragmatic steps to reduce the role and number of its nuclear weapons, a group of nations seeks to derail our current course in favor of a nuclear weapons ban. And this is what Paul has mentioned, the results of the open-ended working group. Pursuit of such a ban, in our view, is unrealistic and simply impractical. Unrealistic in that it fails to factor in the international security environment, and impractical since such a treaty would presently be unverifiable. That is not a good start for any initiative relating to nuclear weapons. The unfortunate irony of the current ban treaty movement is that it could actually end up harming the proven, practical, and inclusive efforts that have achieved tangible results on disarmament and will continue to do so. Nuclear disarmament can only be achieved through an approach that takes into account the views and the security interests of all states, and that is every state. That is why the United States rejects the final report from the open-ended working group on nuclear disarmament and will oppose any resolution at the United Nations this year commencing negotiations on a legally binding instrument banning nuclear weapons. Despite the rhetoric about the size of the group pushing for the ban treaty, the simple fact is that the majority of the world's population, over 4 billion people, lives in a nuclear weapon state or one that is covered by a nuclear deterrent. The United States knows, and we can and will disagree on process, but achieving the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons will require all of us working together. In his capstone address before the UN General Assembly last week, President Obama spoke about how no global challenge can be overcome by one country alone. Only through collective action will we be able to roll back greenhouse gases that threaten the future of the planet, address the Syrian refugee crisis that has left millions without a home, and yes, escape the prospect of nuclear war. We have to work together. Stopping the spread of nuclear weapons and achieving a world where they are no longer able to threaten our existence will require hard work, cooperation, and patience. The United States will continue to do its part, and that's the message we will carry forward at the United Nations in the month to come during the UN First Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anita. Next, we will hear from Daryl Kimball.
Thank you, Sharon. Hello, everyone. Hello, Paul. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be with my fellow panelists here with so much experience in these issues. I'm going to make primarily some comments about 2 issues that have been and are going to be debated at the United Nations. But let me first start out by just putting some of this discussion in context. I mean, as Anita Fried just said, the U.S. and the international community has made a great deal of progress in reducing the number of nuclear weapons, the salience of nuclear weapons over the past couple of decades, but we are in a difficult time. Nuclear tensions are growing because tensions between some of the key nuclear-armed countries is growing, and there is, as Paul Meyer was describing very well, an impasse on making progress on nuclear risk reduction initiatives at the Conference on Disarmament between the U.S. and Russia and at the United Nations. So, I mean, I think we have to keep in mind that this is a time for creative and practical ideas and sustained high-level action to deal with the persistent challenges and obstacles on nuclear disarmament. And I think there's consensus about the fact that progress on nuclear disarmament and maintaining a world without nuclear weapons requires a multitude of legal and non-legal measures. That's a line that came out of the humanitarian initiative statement from earlier this year. And I think that's something that the nuclear and non-nuclear weapons states can agree about. And I think many would agree that progress requires consideration of not just the security dimensions and the political obstacles that currently impede progress, but also the moral, the legal, the humanitarian dimensions of nuclear weapons. So I think we need to think about a both-and approach as we try to move forward with practical, concrete ideas. But first, let me talk about one of these practical ideas, and I would agree with Anita that the recent UN Security Council Resolution 2310 was an important success. It was an expression of the international community's support for the de facto global norm against nuclear testing. It underscores the importance of moving forward with securing the remaining signatures and ratifications to gain entry into force of the treaty from the 8 holdout states, including the United States and China. And it also underscores the value of the international monitoring system, which is helping to detect and deter nuclear testing, surreptitious nuclear testing, even before entry into force. So this is also important because the resolution recognizes, it notes something stated in the P5 statement about the CTBT just a week earlier, that signatories should not take actions that would defeat the object and purpose of the treaty, which is to halt nuclear weapon test explosions or any other nuclear explosion. So with this language, the resolution reaffirms the view of the international community that all 183 state signatories of the treaty have a legal obligation not to conduct nuclear test explosions. That's not a new legal obligation. It's not a substitute for the ratifications necessary for entry into force, but it's a strong and timely reaffirmation of the global taboo against nuclear testing. And it gives public expression to an existing legal obligation of all of those signatories. So I want to congratulate the U.S. for taking this forward and the other members of the Security Council for working together in New York at an extremely difficult time for the Council. It was amazing to see the Council come together on this issue just a day or two after there was nearly a diplomatic food fight in the Security Council chamber on other issues. So it's an important testament to the international support for the test ban treaty. A couple other notes about the resolution. I would also just point out that the suggestion from some Republican senators before the resolution went forward that the resolution would impose a new legal obligation not to test was incorrect, and it was incorrect from the get-go. And their threat to try to cut off funding for the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization and the International Monitoring System was not only injudicious, but that threat did not change the text of the resolution, the negotiations over the resolution in New York, because the resolution simply reaffirms the existing obligation of the United States as a signatory not to conduct nuclear test explosions. And so, given the challenging path forward on CTBT ratification, reconsideration ratification in the U.S. and the other 8 states, I think this resolution is a common sense measure to reinforce the fragile global norm against nuclear testing. One other final point about the resolution on the test ban, I think it also may be significant in the next few weeks, not so much at the UNGA, but in Vienna, where the Nuclear Suppliers Group may be meeting soon to discuss what kind of criteria might be appropriate for allowing new members into the Nuclear Suppliers Group. There has been an ongoing discussion about how and whether and under what conditions India, Pakistan, Israel might be allowed into the Nuclear Suppliers Group as members. The resolution should solidify the emerging consensus among NSG states that one of the key criteria for NSG membership should be signature of the CTBT. And I would hope that the United States, Russia, China, the UK, France, as key sponsors and supporters of UNSC 2310 would support this position, this idea about criteria in the NSG context. And to do otherwise, just a few weeks after this resolution was approved by the Council, I think would contradict the spirit of the resolution and the value of it. So Paul has already opened up, and Anita has responded in part to the second issue I wanted to address, which is the very likely introduction of a resolution this week, perhaps next week, of a resolution to open up multilateral negotiations in 2017 on a new legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. I think that this is going to move forward. I think it's probably going to get the support of 120 or so states. My understanding is that the resolution is not going to be very specific about the scope of this negotiation. It's going to be broad, and so that will encourage a large number of states to endorse the resolution. And some of the tough issues about the scope of any such instrument will have to be worked out in the negotiations that would begin next year. Now, I would agree with Paul that at its core, this is an expression of frustration with the nuclear armed states' failure to follow through on their 2010 NPT related nuclear disarmament commitments. And it's due to the fact that a large majority of the UN member states argue, I think correctly, that the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons use mean that we need to act with greater urgency to eliminate nuclear dangers. And we heard from Anita, I won't repeat, that disarmament should be step by step, which requires time and the right security conditions. And, you know, just to repeat one thing that she said, she was arguing, and many of the P5 argue this, that this process could actually end up harming the proven practical and inclusive efforts that have achieved tangible results on disarmament. I think the reality that we must recognize is that since the negotiation of the 2010 U START treaty, which was very important and is still very important, progress on disarmament has been underwhelming at best. Most of the P5 have failed to put forward any new disarmament proposals since 2010. President Obama has put forward some important proposals, but those proposals have not gone forward in part because there's not a willing or thoughtful partner in Moscow on this issue. And making matters worse, the United States and Russia and the UK are in the process of spending tens of billions of dollars to recapitalize their nuclear forces. Just yesterday, Secretary Carter was in Minot pounding the table about the importance of recapitalizing the nuclear triad. He was arguing that we have to do this or we're not going to have a deterrent. I would just, as a side note, mention that that's a false choice. The choice that we need to be looking at and thinking about is to what extent and how does the United States maintain the arsenal, and at what cost? And this is an important debate for another forum at another time, but these activities are going forward, and the rest of the world, I think in Vancouver, they see it this way. I think they see it this way in Vienna and Brasilia and many other countries. These efforts to recapitalize the nuclear arsenals is not really consistent with, does not contribute to achieving Article 6 goals. So there's a lot of frustration. So the humanitarian initiative, the advocates of the pursuit of a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, they argue that a legally binding norm to prohibit nuclear weapons will be needed to attain and maintain a world without nuclear weapons. And they argue that this initiative is consistent with the NPT, and it would strengthen the whole nuclear disarmament and nonproliferation enterprise. I would agree that such a ban is eventually a necessary step toward a world without nuclear weapons. And fundamentally, if you think about it, this is consistent with President Obama's call for action to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons and with the goals of the NPT. To suggest otherwise, I think, defies common sense. And even though the five NPT-recognized nuclear weapons states will likely boycott the negotiation, this instrument could still have the positive effect of further delegitimizing nuclear weapons and strengthening the norm against their use. So while this may not be a substitute for the practical steps that we need to accomplish to achieve nuclear disarmament, I think it is an approach that certainly can accommodate the so-called progressive steps on nuclear disarmament, verifiably reducing the number of nuclear weapons until elimination, reducing the role and salience of nuclear weapons through changes in nuclear weapons employment strategies, prohibiting fissile material production and eliminating stockpiles, and bringing the CTBT into force, et cetera. So how should Washington respond? If I might offer some ideas for consideration. I mean, I think rather than calling this unrealistic and counterproductive, which fosters resentment, quite frankly, amongst the non-nuclear weapon state majority on a kind of personal and a substantive level, the Obama administration or the next administration might think about taking the high road. It could simply say that at this time, given the international security environment, the United States can't join a ban treaty, but may join the negotiation as an observer. I think it would be important for the United States to be there in order to participate in the discussion and contribute useful ideas and suggestions, even if it does not intend to join such an instrument. And the United States looks forward to working with all states to pursue more effective, verifiable measures to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. And then finally, I think another important response by the United States and the other nuclear-armed countries, particularly those that are members of the NPT, has to be to consider and propose and pursue new initiatives that would jumpstart progress on disarmament, that would reduce nuclear tensions and reduce nuclear costs. Today is the 25th anniversary of a very important initiative by a Republican president. That's correct, by a Republican president. George W. Bush, in September 27th, 1991, announced the unilateral withdrawal of many hundreds, if not thousands, I don't know the precise number, of tactical nuclear weapons in order to reduce tensions at a time when the Soviet Union was breaking up. And President Gorbachev reciprocated. That was an important step. Taking a page out of that playbook, what the United States might do sooner or later is to pursue further reductions of our own strategic deployed nuclear stockpile, which the Defense Department and the President have determined right now is 1/3 larger than we need for deterrence requirements. We don't necessarily have to wait for the Russians to accept an invitation to negotiate further. We can reduce the numbers and still meet our deterrence requirements. We can also save a great deal of money with the modernization of the nuclear arsenal with such an approach. Now that takes bold and courageous leadership. It may not be possible in this environment, but that is the kind of thing that we need to be talking about in order to break the deadlock on disarmament that we are experiencing today. So those are some thoughts. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Darrell. We are, if you can cut your mic. Next, we will hear from John Wolfstall. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Sharon. Nice to see you again. Nice to be back at CSIS, one of my old stomping grounds. Nice to be with old friends and colleagues and to see everyone here. And Paul, nice to see you. Hope you're enjoying Vancouver. I probably would not be on Skype. I'd probably be out hiking somewhere or drinking good coffee. What I'll do is, in addition to associating myself with Anita's remarks, which I really think laid out our opinion and logic quite clearly, is talk about three issues. One, as is often overlooked, the strong record that, in fact, we have achieved under this administration. When I hear the criticism among my friends and colleagues about how the machinery is broken and we're not doing enough and disarmament is lagging, they tend to forget the pretty dramatic and important work that we have done that has already made significant progress. Things that 7.5 or 8 years ago would have been really, in my view, unimaginable. And I think we've been able to achieve a tremendous number of things that are often worth pointing to. And then talk a little bit about our views on the first committee and what the path ahead is and where we think there's an opportunity to make progress. So let me run down the whole litany. Imagine today if we did not have the New START treaty that was negotiated in record time and ratified by the president in the face of pretty strong and I would argue poorly argued and not fact-based criticism from members of the Senate. We now have an ongoing verification process in Russia where imagine if we had a more aggressive and more difficult relationship, but did not have the predictability associated with binding legally verified arms control reductions in Russia. And I think all of us, having gone through history, understand how things like the bomber gap and the missile gap emerged. We are not fighting that because of what New START has been able to achieve. And as has been noted, the president has offered to negotiate further 1/3 reduction with Russia. That is an offer that's still on the table, and we have lamented often the fact that we do not have a willing partner in Russia. And so I think criticism that the United States is not leading, criticism that the president hasn't put forward a bold agenda in order to demonstrate our further commitment to Article 6 and to disarmament, I think is just misplaced criticism. Now, we understand that because we listen and we react more than some of our negotiating partners, we tend to get more of the heat, but I think credible analysts have to lay the concern where it belongs, and I think from our point of view, it's clear it's not at the feet of the United States. We have and continue to support the most far-reaching negative security assurance in our history, pledging not to use or threaten to use the nuclear weapons against states that are in compliance with their nuclear nonproliferation obligations. This is a dramatic change from our Cold War and post-Cold War position, and one that provides incentives for states to live up to their international nonproliferation obligations. The United States has put forward, and is the only state to put forward and is living up to its obligation not to pursue new nuclear weapons and new military capabilities as we pursue life extension programs for our arsenal, which is aged well past its original and intended service lives. We take our responsibilities not to add to the proliferation concerns seriously. It would be much easier, it would be much cheaper, and it would be much more reliable for us to start from scratch and build new nuclear warheads, but we have chosen not to do so to demonstrate our compliance and commitment to nonproliferation. We have stated clearly that what we seek is to adopt a sole purpose strategy where we can achieve a sufficient capability so that we can state clearly that the sole purpose for nuclear weapons is for nuclear deterrence. We have made great progress since the Nuclear Posture Review was put forward in 2010. Sadly, we have not been able to announce such a change, but it's something that we continue to review, and whether we or the next administration chooses to do so, it will be made possible because of the changes in doctrine and the investments and capabilities that we have put forward under this administration. The nuclear security summits have made remarkable progress. Poland just became the 31st country to eliminate highly enriched uranium. We have whole quadrants of the globe that are now HEU-free, whole continents that are HEU-free, and no one should kid themselves that this is not a direct result of the president's personal and direct investment in driving not just the United States, but the entire international community and global leaders to take this situation seriously and to reduce the threats of nuclear terrorism and proliferation. We have also, something that's not widely recognized or touted, launched the International Partnership for Disarmament and Nonproliferation, a collective of 25 countries in conjunction with the Nuclear Threat Initiative to promote technological innovation for how we will verify both nonproliferation and disarmament commitments. As Anita said, it adds no value to try and negotiate a ban treaty that can't be verified. No confidence will be gained by producing a treaty that no one can prove is actually achieving its intended result. And so I would encourage states that have been critical or not partnered with the IPDNV, but who are active in the Australia group movement or the ban movement, to reconsider where their investments might be best placed, because there are opportunities to make real progress in how we will secure the President's goal of a world without nuclear weapons. I think it's also clear for people who've been paying attention, and I know many of you in this room have, that the President's personal commitment to the non-proliferation regime and to our international commitments have actually made tremendous progress, not just in places like the UN or the UN Security Council, but specifically in the case of Iran. The JCPOA is a remarkable non-proliferation achievement, one that I hope we will see replicated should we face similar challenges in the future. But several years ago, we were actively on a path that could have led to war with Iran. I can't remember the last time that people actively talked about taking military action against Iran, because we know that the verification system that we have in place, the caps and limits that are on Iran's program, will effectively forestall that country's ability to pursue a nuclear weapon for many years to come. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Associated Resolution that was just passed and that Darrell mentioned and had a strong hand in promoting, 2310, is another sign of this commitment. The consensus that we have helped to lead on sanctioning North Korea for their violations of international law and Security Council resolutions. And then I think, as people recognize, the President's personal commitment as embodied by his visit to Hiroshima. Again, something that I think would have been unimaginable just 10 years ago, that a sitting president would go and make the speech that the president made to engage in the way he did with survivors, in my view, is something that the United States should be proud of as a demonstration of our leadership. So I know some of you already know many of these things, but I think we forget that there's actually a lot that's been achieved. And when people say, well, why isn't the United States doing anything, I want to make sure that people understand the context in which they're making those kind of comments. One brief comment in response to our chair, who I know understands this, but I want to make very clear. There's an expression that it's a poor musician who blames their instrument. The machinery of the Conference on Disarmament is not broken. It is not rusty. The national will of members of the Conference on Disarmament to make progress on real challenges is what is lacking. We could pursue negotiations on a fissile material treaty tomorrow if not for the decision of one country, Pakistan, to block even the start of negotiations over what a fissile material cutoff treaty will look like and what it will and won't include. And so that is not a problem with the machinery, unless you want to blame the concept of consensus. If you want to talk about whether or not we should have consensus as an operating function within the United States, the United Nations General Assembly, or within the Conference on Disarmament, that is a realistic discussion and a reasonable discussion to have. But we do not believe that you will make progress on issues of global import unless you can gain consensus on what it is you're trying to achieve. And so for those countries and those individuals who criticize the machinery, I ask them to look specifically at what the process has been like, what the United States and other countries have tried to do in order to get these negotiations started. And I know that Sharon knows this very well because she's a keen observer, but it's something that also, I think, deserves attention. Now, for the UN First Committee, this is sort of like a movie that we know the ending, but we're sort of all curious how the performances are going to go. We have no illusions about what is going to happen at the UN First Committee. We believe that there will be a ban resolution put forward, and we believe that a majority, but far short of a consensus, will vote in favor of that resolution. And there will be an effort to negotiate a ban convention that does not have the support of any states that possess nuclear weapons and lacks the support of most, if not all, of the countries that are covered by nuclear deterrent obligations. And so I think we have to ask our questions: what is the purpose and the real value, and what is the impact of creating such a dynamic? In our view, the goal should be to do no harm to the non-proliferation regime, to do no harm to the non-proliferation treaty, and to do no harm to the goal that we all share, which is to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. And in our opinion, and in the logic that Anita has laid out and that we have enunciated many times, the ban effort at this point fails this test. We know that there was majority support for the open-ended working group. Some 67, 68 countries voted in favor. The vote was essentially, if you take the abstentions and no votes, you basically have a 2/3, 1/3 split between supporters and opponents. That is not consensus. That is not the path forward to achieve the goal that we all have laid out. And I think we have to ask ourselves what it says when at a minimum, the three depository states of the NPT, the states charged with helping to ensure the machinery of the NPT works the way it should, have all opposed not only the ban, but participation in the open-ended working group. In my view, the two efforts are in fact at odds and at tension, and we need to think very seriously about what the effort to negotiate a ban will mean going into the next NPT review context. And I think Paul laid it out very well, that it is creating tension, it is undermining the consensus in the regime, but this is not because the nuclear weapon states and umbrella states have said, no, we don't want to talk about that. It's because the proponents for the ban have pushed an extreme position and have been unwilling to compromise and to meet the states with legitimate security concerns in the middle ground. And I can say this because specifically we have met with the leaders both at a high national level and at a diplomatic level and tried to find common ground so that we can harness the energy of the ban movement in a way that is constructive, in a way that makes progress on specific issues, and they've been unwilling to meet us halfway because it damages their ability to achieve their specific goals, which is to continue to orchestrate this large international movement over an ideal, but that doesn't actually understand where the rubber meets the road. And I think that is something we should also look at, which is what are the primary motivations for the leadership of this effort. I have no doubt about the good intentions for the many diplomats, the many experts that have invested time and energy, and particularly the non-governmental community, but I think we also have to look at the international dynamics that are at play here. So let's just for a second, and I'll finish with these 2 points, play out what the ban negotiation and process is going to look like. We will have a UN First Committee that tables and votes on an effort to negotiate or have the UN General Assembly negotiate a ban treaty. Those negotiations will probably start. None of the countries that possess nuclear weapons and few, if any, of the countries that are covered by nuclear assurances will participate. This will create new fissures in the Non-Proliferation Treaty regime. This will rob energy and attention to where we can make progress, including the Conference on Disarmament, which is tasked primarily with seeking to negotiate or begin negotiations on an FMCT. It will rob effort from the effort to bring the CTBT into full force. And in my view, we should be spending that time, effort, scarce capital resources where it can make progress, and that is putting additional attention on the effort to negotiate further reductions with Russia and also to push Pakistan to accept the start of negotiations in the CD. And often when I have diplomatic engagements with countries that are leading the ban effort, I often ask, when was the last time you met with Russian officials and pushed them to accept the president's offer to negotiate? When was the last time you met with Pakistani officials to push them to accept our proposal at the CD? I'm either met with dumb silence or to say, well, we tried, but they won't meet with us. Well, that is not an excuse for not trying to put effort where the real attention belongs, because in our view, there are no shortcuts to achieving what it is we all seek, which is the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. It takes hard work, it takes sustained diplomacy, it takes commitment to dealing with the real security issues and operating in the global context, which I think we're all aware of, but often is disconnected from the diplomatic efforts at the CD or the UN, because in many countries, those officials tasked with these responsibilities either have their own leeway, their own negotiating instructions, and are often disconnected from the national security or the international security architecture. And that's something that I hope that we will try to draw attention to as we pursue the upcoming UN First Committee. So sorry if I went on a couple minutes too long, but look forward to questions and comments from the floor.
Totally fine. Thank you, John. I did receive an email late last week saying, you know, from someone saying, I'd like to come to your event, but, you know, they're all going to say the same thing. So I'm glad we have a little bit of a debate here. I am going to take issue with this whole disarmament, this machinery stuff. And the reason is, John, I am a musician. I do play multiple instruments, and actually sometimes it is the instrument that, you know, is out of tune or has a string broken or something. So, but we could talk a little bit about the consensus requirement in the Conference on Disarmament and how an UNGA resolution would be different and why that would or how that shifts the dynamics of countries who are participating in negotiations, because obviously the requirement, if for those of you who don't know this, in the Conference on Disarmament, for there to be a consensus for each and every step of the way has led to, the failure of the CD even to decide on a negotiating mandate over the last 25 years. I mean, you can't even get to step one. So I don't know, that might be a little too down in the weeds.
I'm not sure you get a large viewership on.
We might not get a large viewership. I'm struck, and I'm going to open the floor first to our panelists to pose questions to each other. But I'm struck by, I have a little cognitive dissonance. Are these resolutions helpful, hurtful? If they don't do anything, do we, is this a case of sticks and stones? May break my bones, but names won't ever hurt me. If there were, I take your point about, and I think that's a great tweet, by the way, there are no shortcuts to nuclear disarmament. I totally agree with you, but there is a big frustration from the side which says, okay, you've been telling us step by step for disarmament for decades, and yeah, we've certainly, absolutely made a lot of progress, and a lot of that, it's not just the Obama administration, but even previous administrations. Darrell brought up the Bush the senior administration with the presidential nuclear initiatives. You do have to wait for a certain for the political stars to align sometimes to make some progress. But there should also be a process where that can help to push things along. And I think within the NPT, within the Non-Proliferation Treaty, states are frustrated that there is no mechanism within the NPT to move towards reaching Article 6 nuclear disarmament mechanisms. The review conferences sometimes accomplish things, sometimes they don't. They are a forum for discussion. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling at this point. Let me go to Paul. Paul, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, thanks, Sharon. Thanks for the panelists. I guess a few responses in light of what I heard. First, I think we can't make a fetish out of consensus. Ultimately, it's sovereign acts to decide whether a state adheres to a given agreement. But to prevent the beginning of discussions or negotiations of an agreement, I think is an abuse of the consensus principle. And it's also reflected in action. I mean, the most recent successful multilateral arms control agreement, the Arms Trade Treaty, was negotiated exactly in an open-ended working group in the General Assembly, because its principal sponsor, the United Kingdom, recognized that if it was assigned to the CD, it would be there in a deadlock situation forever. So we have examples of where countries, if you're really serious about the objective, you find the appropriate diplomatic vehicle to achieve it. Therefore, I think what we need to see is a little more determined diplomacy. I'm glad to hear John's comment that there's been an effort to engage the sponsors of the ban resolution. I think we should see compromises coming forward. And frankly, if the sponsors of that resolution are not prepared to change their text to accommodate some of the views, well, maybe it's time for the U.S. and others to present their own resolution. Anita, you say that a ban is impractical and lacks verification. And I agree in many ways. Why not have a forum in which one makes those arguments through an engagement? I mean, as NATO, we have a policy commitment to contribute to creating the conditions to achieve a world without nuclear weapons. So why not engage in a multilateral discussion about what those conditions are and what format and eventual arrangement or agreement might be to facilitate this? The participation really is key as an indication both of good faith in the ultimate objective, but also a form for pointing out the practical elements that do get ignored sometimes by other motivations. The United States should be commended on the leadership regarding the International Partnership on Nuclear Disarmament and Verification. But I would suggest that despite 25 participating states, few in your conference room would be aware of the activities that have been undertaken pursuant to that. We've had some promising UK-US work, UK-Norwegian work. This is the sort of material that could be brought forward in a first committee context and should. Frankly, the non-engagement stance I really find reprehensible and frankly un-American. I've never known Americans to shy away from debate or setting out their views, and I would really urge a reconsideration on that front. I think we have a situation which is corrosive for that really crucial consensus around the NPT, but as Sharon rightly points out, the NPT sets goals. It doesn't set processes. And I think it's incumbent on all the states parties to find the right multilateral process, the most inclusive form for discussing the real substance that is engaged in advancing these agreed goals.
Anita, did you want to respond, or whoever wants to comment? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
let me just do a couple, and thank you, Paul. I appreciate your comments and certainly your expertise and on these issues. First of all, in terms of willingness of the P5 or the nuclear weapon states to further engage or to engage the open-ended working group or the movement who are moving toward ban treaty. I mean, we are engaging on a daily basis. It's not on the front page of the paper, because nobody, as John said, the readership would probably be pretty slim, but we do. I mean, this is what we do as diplomats. We do this on a regular basis. After much discussion, and John knows all about this, the United States and the humanitarian impact movement and the conferences that they held. The first one was in Norway, the second one in Mexico, the third one in Vienna. Well, everyone accused us that, oh my goodness, the P5 are boycotting these meetings. So we got together, and some of the P5, the UK and the US in particular, attended the December 2014 Humanitarian Impact Conference. I went there along with Ambassador Adam Scheinman. I have to say, I mean, and we did put forth our views. I have to say, we were certainly in the minority, and I have to say that the listening on the part of the opponents was pretty selective. Most people asked questions. No one listened to what we said. I think it was already preordained. The outcome was already preordained. I've done this numerous times. I mean, we are out there all the time. I just mentioned I was at the conference in Kazakhstan just last month. I was in Nagasaki at a conference last year. And I can tell you, I'm always in the minority, but I always speak up, and I've been very pleased to hear the arguments and to really have taken them on board. And as I pointed out in my remarks, and we have said numerous times, I mean, this is why, because of the nuclear weapons and the dangers of nuclear weapons, this is why the president is pursuing his policy, the Prague Agenda. The other thing I wanted to mention, quick point I wanted to make, was on the UK-Norway initiative, and yes, the IPNDV, the International Partnership on Verification. It is a smallish group. Well, we have about some 25 countries involved, but we have real working groups. It's on the State Department's website. We have lots of, happy to refer you there. Certainly nothing it's all unclassified, it's all public. We work, as John pointed out, with NTI as a co-partner. And with respect to the UK-Norway initiative, Every single year, I've been in my current job for 4 years, every single year at the UN First Committee, we have a side event, I'm sure you're familiar with side events, where we talk openly. Anyone is invited to come and see, but we talk openly about various topics. The international partnership is one. The UK-Norway initiative, or some variant of it, is always on the agenda. So I mean, if it's, again, people need to, it may not be on the front page of an international newspaper, but the information is out there, and it's certainly available. I would say that there's sometimes a selectivity on the part of some and willingness to engage.
Let me just make a brief comment, then I'll turn it. So let me just foot stomp something Anita said, Paul, because nobody's ever accused me or most of the Americans I work with of being shy to debate, because we obviously think about these issues a lot and believe in them deeply, as do all the people here. As for finding a forum, I think one of the laments we have is that the open-ended working group could have actually been a forum created to achieve an open discussion about what is the future path for disarmament. But as Anita said, that whole process was preordained to create momentum for a banned treaty, which they knew from the beginning we were not supportive of because it does not have verification and does not take in the international security context. So again, I think pointing at us and saying, well, you weren't willing to go along and have a debate, I think fails to focus in on where the challenge has been here, which is the United States is actively seeking and eager to develop and provide momentum for global disarmament, nuclear disarmament. What we need are willing partners who understand how complicated this is, that are willing to take the time and effort and invest the resources, their national resources, their scientific and technical resources, their creativity, their computer science experts, their intelligence experts, because this is really hard work, as you understand. And this is not something that's going to be solved by a nice pat yourself on the back, okay, gee, we all hate nuclear weapons, so let's have a piece of paper that says so. This is going to be really, really difficult, as you understand, and we're not going to let the serious work of disarmament fall victim to what we view as something that's both not constructive and actually damaging to what has actually proven successful, which is the step-by-step pragmatic approach, which has brought down our nuclear weapons levels to the lowest point since Eisenhower's in the White House, that has created an international verification mechanism that actually can prove that weapons are not in locations and that can demonstrate the elimination of nuclear weapons, that can eliminate the elimination of nuclear materials that can be used for nuclear weapons. That's what we should be focused on, and that's where we're going to invest our time and effort.
Let me bring us back to a couple of key issues here. I think John and Anita, and especially John, in your passionate critique of the countries that are pursuing the open-ended working group and the ban treaty negotiations, just kind of proved a point I was trying to make at the very outset. I think, you know, as intellectuals and observers and practitioners, we got to appreciate that getting to zero, reducing nuclear risks takes a multitude of different strategies and efforts, legal, non-legal, political. When one pathway is blocked because there's one country like Pakistan on the fissile material cutoff treaty, blocking progress at the consensus-based CD gets in the way, we should be thinking about some other approach, okay? So one thing we should be thinking about, Canada should be thinking about this. If Canada really cares about the FMCT, let's take the negotiations out of the CD. If the nuclear weapon states are not making progress on disarmament, and there are no active talks between the U.S. and Russia, despite the progress of New START. You know, what mattered, what happened between 1967 and 1987 doesn't really factor into the current problem, which is we still have, you know, about 1,800 nuclear weapons in the United States and Russia that can still be used within short notice. I mean, that's a problem. So we need to focus on what needs to be done now to deal with current risks rather than going back and patting ourselves on the back about progress over the last 20 years, which is vital, but that was in the past. But back to my point, if states are frustrated, as they are in the non-nuclear weapons state majority, what are they to do, John? Okay, what are they to do? What is, and this is a question to you, what is going halfway? What has the United States proposed to Ambassador Alex Kement of Austria and the other leaders of the HINW movement about what a more practical approach would be? And before you answer, let me just point out that if consensus-based negotiations are the key, on a negotiation on nuclear disarmament. That was tried just in January. The British put forward a proposal at the CD in a letter dated 19 February to the Conference on Disarmament to discuss and identify effective measures on nuclear disarmament. But it was blocked, apparently by the Russians, according to my sources. So if you want a consensus-based approach and you want to do it at the CD to talk about that, there are problems. So I think it's natural that the non-nuclear weapons state majority is looking for other creative pathways that I think, as I said, I think are fundamentally compatible with and can accommodate the step-by-step approach that I think all of us at the table here agree are necessary steps to get to zero. It's not a substitute for those steps, but it's compatible. So my question to you is, what would you have these states do? What is meeting us halfway? I don't understand what that.
I can tell you one basic thing we've already discussed here, which is we've invited all these countries to participate in the International Partnership for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Verification. We've asked them to make investments in developing their own technical capability, supporting the travel of their diplomats and their scientific and technical experts to participate and share their innate capabilities. Austria is a scientific powerhouse. They could bring tremendous capabilities to bear. And what they've said is, no, that's a distraction. We want to ban. So, if they really believe in the hard work of disarmament, then let them show up and have those discussions with us and participate in what we think is a very valuable. Now, we're not opposing the ban because they won't participate in the international partnership. We oppose the ban because it's disconnected from what it's going to take to actually achieve the goal that we all support. And there are multiple other steps. The challenge I view, and this is no disrespect to any other diplomat or any other government official because we all have our national priorities, but I think there's an impression that they'd rather have a giant conference with a lot of participants signing on to a statement than actually do the hard work. We invest hundreds of millions of dollars every year in understanding what it takes. The national laboratories, our academic collaboration with universities, technical organizations, NGOs around the world, as you well know, that's where the rubber is going to meet the road. And I have no problem if the country decides they don't want to invest that because they have other priorities. Where I have a challenge is if they say, well, we don't want to invest that, but we know the best way to achieve this goal. And I take issue with the fact that the United States has not done the most of any country, or at least as much as any other country, to achieve the goal that we've laid out in the NPT, in the goal that we all believe is important, which is to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. And if I am passionate about that, it's because I understand what it actually takes to make progress on these issues. And when I have conversations with experts or officials who haven't done that time and effort and don't have the same commitment, but yet want to lecture us on how to achieve that goal, I think there's a disconnect there.
Okay, I hear you.
I would just suggest that it's not criticism of the U.S. necessarily that you're hearing, but U.S. leadership has been so critical to so many of these efforts that those of us in the U.S., we can't see another way forward unless there's U.S. leadership. I don't think anybody would argue that President Obama hasn't done a whole heck of a lot in this area. But one thing I'm struggling with, right, is some of the arguments, step-by-step verification, they can, even though there's a lot of truth in that, they can also be used as kind of cudgels or as roadblocks, right, to not make other progress. And so when you look at CTBT, right, we support CTBT. We've signed it, but we haven't ratified it. We still believe that the CTBT, even though it's not entered into force, represents a norm, right? These non-nuclear weapon states, whatever we want to, the states that are interested in a ban are interested in the same thing, right? If we put up a legal ban against nuclear weapons, well, maybe it's not verifiable. There are a lot of people who thought the CTBT wasn't particularly verifiable. There wasn't a monitoring system in place when it was signed. But we developed a monitoring system over time. We're a lot more confident in that monitoring system. I mean, I think fundamentally they're frustrated and they think, well, if there's a ban, maybe we'll start a trend. Maybe these countries will get serious. And it's not so much the U.S. It's really India, Pakistan, it's North Korea. How do you get towards them? Now, what you would say is, look, you can have a CTBT and it's not going to make a blind bit of difference what North Korea does, right? Because they don't care about, and we could argue about that, right? I think actually they do care about some things that happen in the UN. But so how do you respond to that? Gee, yeah, we don't think a legal ban is, going to do much besides be symbolic and just actually try to kickstart some other efforts. How much does it really take away from FMCT, which hasn't gone anywhere in the CD? How much does it really take away from some of those other
So
efforts?
how many diplomats do the vast majority of countries have that work on these issues? Right? One? Half?
Quarter.
So it's a finite resource, and the amount of time that they spend on the ban, the amount of money they spend organizing and traveling is time that is not spent on these efforts. So I think it's a direct cost. I think there's a direct, and I know there's a direct impact. When we try to engage, when we try to have discussions, when we try to organize international conferences, there's sometimes nobody to meet with because they're busy doing not just the nuclear weapons ban work, but the arms trade treaty and other issues, right? So we're lucky we have a lot of smart people who can work on these issues because we've made the time and the investment to have the capability. We wish other countries would follow suit.
Comments from our panelists before we open it up to Q&A?
Just one quick on, Sharon, on the whole, I mean, Darren, you mentioned, Daryl, you mentioned the UK initiative on, at the CD on FMCT. The United States also had an initiative, which was, I mean, again, it was designed to unblock the moribund CD. But again, I think one of the points that John made also that would be very helpful is if there were more pressure and more attention focused on the countries that are not coming along, such as, don't want to say it again, but I will, Pakistan in particular and others, because that's really where the issue is. Why is Pakistan not engaging? We have come up with every possible permutation to try to come up with an FMCT way to actually begin negotiations that protects Pakistan's interest. Why will Pakistan and other countries could be effective in putting pressure on them? And I also wanted to commend you. I like your idea about practical workarounds, and I think, again, the CTBT UNSCR is exactly the kind of practical workaround that we did work on together, and it was, again, with your support too, that was very much appreciated.
Just one quick point. Yes, the CD has a couple of countries, Pakistan on the FMCT blocking the negotiation. The U.S. proposal, I think, in January was a useful one to expand the scope to include stockpiles, which was what Pakistan has said they wanted to do. They still resist. So I think going forward, and I want to keep us focused on what can we do going forward, practical steps. It is time for the states at this conference on disarmament who want to negotiate an FMCT to do it, but not at the CD. It has been too long. Pakistan has been given all the chances and more, and Pakistan is not supporting it because they're trying to produce more fissile material. They're probably building another uranium enrichment facility, and India is not being helpful itself by not showing more restraint with respect to its nuclear program. So it's time to pursue a different track. But one other just quick point before we get into the Q&A, I think it's important to mention about, I think, the value of the likely negotiation on an instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. And I think that is, it will put this issue in the public eye in a lot of places where it might not otherwise be. We're all bemoaning the fact, as we watch the presidential election, that there's not serious consideration of some of the important nuclear weapons issues out there. We're all bemoan the fact that the public is not as aware of nuclear dangers as they might be in public figures and politicians. I think the debate that the ban treaty negotiations may foster could be very helpful in raising some important questions that we don't always think about. What is the legal basis for using nuclear weapons? What's the moral basis? What are the effects of nuclear weapons if used? I think these are all important questions that ultimately contribute to the goal of reducing the salience and reducing the risks that nuclear weapons are used. So I think we have to look at this also in terms of the intangible qualities of this debate, even if the instrument that results does not have a concrete immediate effect on reducing the number of nuclear weapons that Russia or China or France, North Korea has.
Any other comments?
Just a point of clarification, our proposal at the CD was not to include stocks. It was to have a mandate that could include or exclude them, but to leave that matter for the negotiations, which had been the issue Pakistan had pointed to for 20 years, which we tried to eliminate, and yet we still met with Pakistani objection.
Thanks for your clarification. That's what we reported in arms control today. Yes.
Well, thank you. You have been a very patient audience while we've been debating these things up here. I'm going to open the floor to questions, so I'm going to ask you, we do have a microphone to come around, and please tell us who you are and where you're from, and if it's a comment, that's okay, but we'll try and keep it short so we can get as many in. So, Jennifer.
Hi, well, thank you to all the panelists and very good presentations.
Jennifer McBee from?
Sorry, Jennifer McBee from FAS, but I was working in the CD, the famous body, on the nuclear test ban treaty. And I wondered, well, I agree that I don't think that they'll come to an agreement on FMCT, so I would assume that the best thing would be to take it out of that body and do it somewhere else, but that's just my own personal opinion. I wondered if Anita and John might particularly comment going forward in the next administration. I know you've said that you've carried out a lot of education efforts on CTBT, and I know a lot will depend on the Senate, but what would you advise the next administration to do to try to get it ratified?
You know, I think the next administration, in our opinion, this is not surprising, will be well served to do what we have tried to do, which is to make sure that senators understand how far we've come in our ability to ensure the security and the capability and reliability of our own nuclear arsenal. The lab directors, in meeting with the Vice President in 2010, said we know more about how our nuclear weapons work now than when we tested nuclear weapons. I think that's a testament to how far we've come. There's no question that our ability to verify compliance with the CTBT has been demonstrated time and time again. So I think the two central questions about sustainability of our arsenal and verifiability of the treaty have been answered. And I would encourage the next administration to continue that engagement effort with the Senate and to encourage them to take up again their responsibilities to evaluate and provide their advice and consent to treaties broadly, but also on treaties which clearly benefit our security, like the CTBT, so that the next president will have an opportunity to ratify the CTBT.
Can I just, yeah, sure.
Thank you. And also the outreach, certainly with the Senate and the education effort is very important, but also with the public and especially domestically. I have to put in a plug for my boss, and John will certainly, I know he'll endorse me, but Rose Gottemoeller, I mean, there's been no one who has done more on the part in terms of the education effort for the public to get them to understand and also to listen about the consequences of testing and what the United States did. And she spent countless hours in the states, the so-called downwinder states. She's gone to the Marshall Islands. Again, this gets to Paul's point about understanding the moral implications. I mean, Rose has also visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and our president has done the same, and so did Secretary Kerry. So I would also encourage the next administration to keep up that part of it.
I would just suggest, in addition, obviously private meetings with senators and staff are important, but I think the American public deserves to see some real hearings on this topic. I mean, we didn't have Senate hearings. There was one, I forget, was it last week or September 7th for the first time in 20 plus years. Is there any way to, probably no way to force that issue, but those of you in the audience, write to your members and say that's what you'd like to hear, right? Like to see some real debate, public debate. Question right up here.
Hi, thanks. I want to say, I'm Martin Fleck. I'm the Security Program Director at Physicians for Social Responsibility. We've been working to reduce nuclear dangers since 1962. Thank you, Sharon and CSIS, for this opportunity to discuss some really important things that are happening around the world. It's refreshing to come to an event like this inside the Beltway. I want to, on behalf of PSR, I want to thank John and Anita and the Obama administration for a lot of progress on disarmament during this administration. And of course, PSR was thrilled that President Obama traveled to Hiroshima. And I want to thank Daryl and Paul also for coming to the defense of the international movement, defense and context of the international movement to prohibit nuclear weapons. So I do have a question. But I want to comment on two elephants in the room, in my opinion. One is, and I'm thinking of a country like Austria, which tabled the resolution calling for negotiations to begin next year on a prohibition treaty. And then, when you're a country like Austria, you don't have any nuclear weapons, but you are responsible for defending your population and your country. So there's a defense minister in Austria, and that defense minister is supposed to keep the country and the people secure in the event of a nuclear war involving any of the 9 nuclear-armed states. That would impact the security of Austria or all of these non-nuclear weapon states. And, they have an obligation even under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to pursue general and complete disarmament. One of the reasons is for their own self-defense. And I would say that is one of the impetus that has a lot to do with 107 nations at the open-ended working group voicing support for this prohibition treaty. Because it is, that was one thing. That's one elephant in the room, is let's keep in mind that the security of all nations depends on nuclear disarmament, because if there's ever a nuclear war, then it's going to affect their security. Secondly, in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the United States is obligated to pursue general and complete disarmament. It's been 46 years. 46 years, the non-nuclear weapon states who've signed the NPT and have agreed not to pursue nuclear weapons, they've been waiting 46 years for the step-by-step process. And I think it's excusable that they are feeling impatient with that process. I think it's understandable that they're looking for new mechanisms and ways to stigmatize. And one other thing I want to say is that PSR is fully supportive of this movement. We're part of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons that's been heavily involved. We see this as friendly to the Prague agenda. The president said that he is seeking a world free of nuclear weapons. This is an effort to move us a little further along towards a world free of nuclear weapons. So I guess my request, my comment, my question is to John and Anita, can you please respond to Daryl's suggestion that instead of being boxed into a corner with 8 other nuclear-armed states who look like the bad guys in this scene, wouldn't it be better for the United States to send a delegation to these treaty negotiations as an observer, even just as an observer? I'd like a response to Daryl's suggestion. Sorry that took so long.
Next administration.
I think there are 2 challenges that we have to face. The one we've already gone over multiple times, which is despite Daryl's constructive approach and the constructive approach we've heard from many states, we view the effort to negotiate a ban as premature, and it actually has a cost to the broader non-proliferation treaty regime, which we value, and that because we support disarmament, because we support both nuclear disarmament and general and complete disarmament focused on the NPT, we do view them as in competition. But as I think Paul and I talked about earlier, the United States has never shied away from a desire to engage with responsible actors in the international community on issues of concern. Daryl phrased it in a very different way than the ban movement has phrased it. If there's to be discussions about when the use of nuclear weapons might be morally acceptable or illegal or legal, and there's a forum for engaging in that for the purpose of improving understanding, for reducing miscalculation, improving communication, the United States has always demonstrated its ability and willingness to engage in that. But if the goal is a ban without verification, that is disconnected from the very clear security requirements of the United States and its allies, because just as Austria's defense minister is honor-bound to protect its country, we are honor-bound to protect our country, then we have a disconnect. And I won't pull punches when it comes to expressing our concerns about the real impact that this effort is having on what has proven to be effective at negotiating reductions and securing nuclear materials around the world.
I would just add, John points out, obviously we're honor-bound to protect our own country and also our allies that we are obligated to protect under treaties. So yes, Austria certainly has an obligation to protect, and the Austrian defense minister and the government has an obligation to protect their country. But conversely, we have obligations to our treaty partners, and that is because at this moment, deterrence does count. It does matter. We live in a world where the security situation, we do not have a world where we can do away with deterrence. Deterrence works. That is why we need those 4,000, at least at this moment. That's why we do need the nuclear weapons, by the way. Also, we want to go to lower numbers, but we do need the nuclear weapons at the moment because they do preserve balance and strategic stability, because the current situation, the security situation, does not promote more quick move. And I would also say the United States is also impatient with the move toward disarmament. I mean, no one is more impatient. But again, the only responsible and the only way that really works is the step-by-step practice where we move forward.
Real quick, I just wanted to clarify for the record, if anybody's keeping the record, what I was suggesting as an alternative to the current U.S. response to the resolution on a ban treaty negotiation would be to say, at this time, given the international security environment, the United States cannot join a ban treaty, but will join as an observer, and looks forward to working with all states to pursue more effective steps in nuclear disarmament. So I would encourage you guys just to go back and think about it. You don't have to make rash decisions. You know, as we saw last night, that's not always a good thing. So I'll just leave it there.
All right, I see a question up front and then in the back. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Mitsuo Nakai. Regarding North Korea, what are we doing about North Korea to stop the nuclear weapons? Can we do anything about it? If yes, what can be done? Or what is the United Nations is doing it? What's Ban Ki-moon is doing about it, trying to do about it? That's my question.
At the risk of repeating myself from my comments the other day at the Wilson Center, which I believe you were there for as well, we feel that we've made tremendous progress both in the passage of UN Security Council Resolution 2270, imposing much tougher sanctions on North Korea's ability to acquire hard resources, strategic materials which can aid and support their nuclear weapon and ballistic missile program. In the wake of North Korea's 5th nuclear weapons test, we have begun a process of seeking another further round of sanctions. We are convinced that the only way we will achieve our common goal of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula is through convincing Kim Jong-un that he has put possession of nuclear capabilities above the interest of his own people and his own survival, and that the sanctions path is the only way he will achieve his goals, which is to be accepted by the international community as a legitimate leader of a legitimate state. That is going to be a long term effort. We'd like to make faster progress, but we understand that this is something, again, that takes hard work and sustained effort. We wish that this would have been successful by now. We recognize there's frustration that it hasn't been. We're committed to a diplomatic effort backed by sanctions that demonstrates that North Korea's possession of nuclear capabilities is unacceptable, and that we remain firmly committed to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Sharon, just real quick, I mean, the next U.S. president is going to have a plan for how to deal with this before Inauguration Day. The North Koreans are testing at an increasing rate their nuclear weapons and their ballistic missiles. The sanctions have been very useful. The Security Council needs to tighten the screws. It's going to be difficult negotiating that with China at this time. But South Korea and the United States, to some extent Japan, are going to have to adjust their approach about engaging with the North. And it is difficult to engage with the North. It's not fun to engage the North. John has been to North Korea. It's not a fun place to be, but it's work that has to be done. You know, I continue to believe, a lot of experts believe that there are things that the North Koreans are interested in bargaining for. We need to make sure that denuclearization is the ultimate goal. But one of the adjustments we need to make is we need to be clear about the fact that with further nuclear testing and missile testing, the North Koreans are going to be able to deploy nuclear warheads on ballistic missiles soon. Don't know how soon, but soon. And so near-term objective is a freeze of further testing, and especially long-range ballistic missile testing. So, I mean, this is going to be something the next administration is going to grapple with, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, and they better have a plan before day one.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Sarah Galvin. I'm actually a political science student specializing in international security matters at the level of the United Nations. My question to you relates to the legal framework of obligation for the United States in the context of nuclear discussions, and specifically pertains to the Vienna Convention on the Laws of Treaties. According to the Vienna Convention, Article 18, which I can directly quote, "A state is obligated to refrain from acts which would defeat the object and purpose of a treaty when it has signed the treaty or has exchanged instruments constructing the treaty subject to ratification, acceptance, or approval, until it shall have made its intent clear not to become a party to the treaty." Now, considering that the United States signed the CTBT, but the Senate voted not to ratify, is the United States even obligated to follow the framework set out by the CTBT? And if not, what does the United States need to do before we can further pursue action in the international stage as it relates to this problem?
So I am not a lawyer, and I'm not our State Department legal representative, but having worked this issue over the last several months, I know there is some dispute over this. If you talk to different parts of the Congress and the executive branch, the United States is a signatory to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. We have never withdrawn our signature to the CTBT, and as such, under the Vienna Convention of Treaties, we are obligated to not take actions that are inconsistent with its object and purpose.
Just one quick comment. There's a useful letter from Secretary Kerry to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee dated September 7th on this subject. Some Republican critics of the treaty claim that because the Bush administration did not pursue the ratification of the CTBT, that Article 18 Vienna Convention on Law of Treaty obligation no longer exists. There are a number of international lawyers that would dispute that. I would dispute that. But even if that were true, the Obama administration has made it pretty clear time and again that it would like to see the CTBT ratified by the U.S. Senate and entered into force. And the Security Council resolution that was just passed reaffirms the view that all states who have signed the treaty should not be taking actions contrary to the purpose, the object or purpose of the treaty, which is to ban nuclear testing. So, and I would note that those senators who raised objections and concerns about this, Senator Cotton, Senator Corker, Senator Rubio, have all issued statements in the last couple of days that essentially back down from their earlier quibbles about this.
All
have another question in the center.
Camille DeWalder, Booz Allen Hamilton. As one who's worked science engagement issues for much of my career thus far, and has seen the real progress that can be made in that area, I'm wondering, it sounds like the international partnership on nonproliferation and disarmament that you mentioned can make some real progress. And I was wondering if John would indulge me, looking 5-10 years down the road, what do you hope that organization will have achieved?
I think the sky's the limit, quite literally. I work for Vice President Biden, so I like to say literally a lot. I could see a variety of initiatives, activities, and accomplishments, and it really is limited only by the investment that countries make in it. Having worked in this area for many decades and looking at what we've been able to achieve at things like the Cooperative Monitoring Center at Sandia National Laboratories, where you have test labs where you can bring participants from different countries so that they can understand the technology that's available to them and apply them to unique security situations. Looking at the possibility for developing demonstration facilities. Some of the work I did at Monterey, or not that I did, but my colleagues did at Monterey, looking at virtual reality applications for training international inspectors and nuclear weapons elimination. I think there's a tremendous capability, particularly once you add in what we're developing in terms of open source technology and applications. So I think it's limited only by the creativity of the people involved. And as anybody here who has worked in government understands, and no disrespect to Anita or myself or Sharon, who's worked in government, or the people in this room, we are not the most creative people in the world. And so we need to draw upon the expertise in the private sector, in the academic community, in the Science and Technology Center, because that's where we're going to make real progress. But even I can't predict how far it'll go. It's a question of investment and attention.
I could just add one point. Yes, the sky is the limit for the future, but I would also point out one thing, that we're starting out small right now. As I mentioned, we have 3 working groups. We have some 25 states. As you can imagine, starting off and getting traction is often very difficult. So we've been at this for just a little over a year. So what we're doing right now, we're not expanding membership, I might note too, just for the record. We are trying to take the group that we have now, who are subdivided into 3 working groups, and to really get traction on some of the work that we're doing, and then look at moving it out. But definitely the sky is the limit in the future.
So I'd like to end our session with a kind of question to all the panelists, and it also gives you an opportunity to say whatever's been on your mind this whole time.
Has that been a problem?
No, I don't think so. This has been remarkable. I was heartened, I guess, by the fact that the word nuclear came up in the debate last night. We got a little taste of the 2 candidates' views, however coherent or incoherent, as the case may be. So my question, so I'm heartened by that, but clearly the next administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, is going to have a set of pretty thorny issues in this area. And so whether it's, pursuing talks with Russia, North Korea, India, Pakistan. So I just wanted to ask each of you if you, top 2 priorities, top 3 priorities for Paul and Daryl. It's what you wish I don't know, maybe you guys will still be in government next time around too. But what do you think the most pressing, what are the most pressing nuclear issues that the next president needs to address, say, in the first 200 days of office? So we'll start with Paul. You've been so patient, and I see there's more daylight out in Vancouver. What would you have the next president focus on?
Well, I think to show leadership on this long neglected file of the FMCT, I mean, it's next year will be 50 years, if I recall correctly, since the General Assembly first adopted a resolution calling for the negotiation of a treaty banning the production of fissile material for nuclear weapons. And I think for sheer credibility of the nuclear order, it's necessary for those negotiations to begin. The way forward is clear. It's through a General Assembly resolution authorizing the commencement of those negotiations, one that is veto-proof, if I can put it that way. And sure, there may be countries that won't be there at the table initially, but we've had that experience before. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty didn't enjoy consensus support either at its birth, and yet we all recognize how crucial it is. So that is, I think, a very doable. I'd like to see my own country, Canada, continue to exercise leadership in that regard, but obviously the influence and clout that the United States could bring to such a process, can't be matched. Secondly, and I think to clarify with the report of the open-ended working group, we've concentrated on its recommendation regarding a ban, but to be fair, other options also are included in that report, and including, and I think importantly, a focus on what might be done in terms of increased transparency measures and risk reduction measures, and these merit serious consideration. And I would suggest, we've heard references to the symbolic importance of President Obama visiting Hiroshima. Well, I think it would also be symbolically important as well as substantively if the U.S. was associated with like-minded countries in the initiation of some multilateral forum where the full contents of that report can be considered, and which I would suggest would be an admirable platform for highlighting some of the good work that has been ongoing, but also, frankly, to have a debate over some of the perceived, obstacles to making further advancements. We have had some brief references to Russia in that regard. As you know, Moscow cites ballistic missile defense, non-weaponization of outer space, precision global strike as other factors that prevent them from taking up the offer of President Obama for further reductions. I think there's a utility in having those points argued in front of a peer audience, if you will, in a multilateral setting. And I think that kind of engagement is one that deserves the support of a future U.S. administration.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul. Anita?
Thanks, Sharon. For me, I'm not sure this can be, who knows what will happen in the first 200 days, but we will, and hopefully the administration will be ambitious. But I would say, first of all, to continue to, it is something that this president is doing. There won't be a Prague agenda or such, because that's a signature President Obama initiative, but to continue to look for ways to move forward on disarmament and to fulfill our Article 6 NPT obligations while maintaining a credible deterrent for the United States, our allies and partners. And this way we need to continue to review our planned modernization program, which is something we're doing. We continually do this, assess whether if there are additional steps to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our security strategy, but then also to pursue and strengthen global non-proliferation writ large. With that said, clearly the next administration will have an NPR, a nuclear posture review, and that will be considered. And then secondly, this is my own, is the New START treaty, is to start to look for ways to, continue to look for ways to engage Russia. As John said, the New START treaty and the fact that it continues to be successfully implemented despite the current tense situation we have bilaterally with Russia is very, very important. And the next administration already needs to start to look at what will a follow-on New START treaty.
Thank you so much. Darryl, final thoughts?
Well, first I would note that President Obama is still the president, and he still has some opportunities to make progress on the Prague agenda, and I hope that he does. There are a number of important options, and my friends here on the panel will be part of those ongoing discussions. So let's keep that in mind. But clearly, the next administration, as I said before, I think has to focus squarely on the North Korea situation, and urgently. They're going to have work to do to maintain implementation and compliance with the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. And related to that, I think they're going to have to begin thinking about how to build upon some of the successful and important restrictions of the deal, how to multilateralize, regionalize some of the restrictions on enrichment levels, on ban on reprocessing, how to think about creating a nuclear test-free zone in the Middle East in order to ensure that as we go forward, neither Iran or other countries in the region have as easy a path to nuclear weapons. There are, as Anita said, some key decisions regarding nuclear force modernization that are going to be right in the face of the new administration from the get-go. How to reshape the plan to spend $85 billion plus on new land-based missiles, whether to move forward with the plan for 1,000 new air-launched cruise missiles at a cost of $20 to $25 billion. Submarines are going to be costing 12 new submarines, $140 billion to develop. There are some very substantial decisions to be made on that side of the defense ledger that have long-term implications, but they've got to be made early. And then I would say if the Senate is of the right disposition, let's say, I think the next administration is going to have to look at whether it would be useful to pursue the kind of engagement that John and Anita were talking about with respect to the test ban treaty. It's important, and the first 2 years of the next administration, Clinton administration, would be important to utilize in that regard. And then finally, there really does have to be a kind of a new and re-energized strategic dialogue with Russia and China on a range of issues, not just nuclear, but we need to get back into a robust conversation with Russia, and we need to expand it with China. Efforts have been made to do that under the Obama administration, but I think the next one will have to work even harder to make sure that happens.
Thanks, Daryl. John?
So I'll be brief, and this echoes a few of Daryl's points. We fully expect that the DPRK will try to challenge the next administration with a continued series of provocations. And so I think whether they like it or not, they're going to be faced with a very real challenge that they need to be prepared for. I think it's also very likely that Iran and the JCPOA, whether it is from domestic opposition or whether it's from Iranian efforts to try and probe, is likely to be a challenge. And so we'll need to continue to focus on the deal and ensure that Iran is living up to its obligations. So far they have been. And then lastly, I would echo very much, we're greatly concerned about the U.S. Russia strategic stability situation and the need to focus in attention to remind President Putin and his leadership of the importance of responsible behavior, abiding by international legal obligations, and also avoiding miscalculation and misunderstandings when it relates to nuclear threats and nuclear dangers remains high on our priority list, and I think will likely to be high on the next administrations as well. So.
Thank you so much. It's been a terrific conversation with actual diversity of views, and it's not a manel, it's a panel, because we have 2 women and 3 men.
No manels.
No manels. But thank you so much for your questions, terrific questions from the audience. Thank you especially to Paul for hanging in there for a full 2 hours with us. I just want to make one brief administrative note before we thank our other panelists. We're having Dr. Lewis Dunn here Thursday at, I think, 3:30 to talk about his nuclear disarmament agenda for the future. For those of you who know Lewis, he's a Republican who was an ambassador to the NPT, a former boss of ours, as a matter of fact. He's an institution. So, and he's always thoughtful. So if these issues continue to interest you, I encourage you to come to that. But mostly, thank you to our 4 terrific panelists. I really do appreciate it. All right. Thanks very much.